I think as coaches, the real art in that comes into your environment when a lot of coaches are taught about the plan, do, review cycle. So what's my
Hmm.
plan? I'm going to go do it, and then after the practice, I'm going to review it. Did what went well? What didn't go well? I think on the micro level, the CLA is doing that constantly throughout a practice
Yeah.
and being
Yeah.
able to plan that in a 1 hour 30, so a 90-minute practice, we may have 6 small-sided games that we're going to look at with 4 or 5 constraints planned in each. But if I recognize that the players aren't learning and moving towards the affordances that I planned, I might change those constraints on the fly. And so that plan, do, review cycle is constantly going on in my mind, as well as watching what the players are doing in front of me. And I think that's where that intention and attention comes back to the fore. So as well as the players, where's my attention as a coach, and what did I want the intention of this small-sided game to be to get to the end goal, which ultimately is we want them to be more skillful in that environment.
You are listening to the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast, transforming athletes into leaders on and off the court with host Coach Furtado. Coaches, are you ready to take your passion for coaching and turn it into a full-time career? I know the challenges firsthand, but the Make Money Coaching Sports program helped me take BTG basketball full-time. If you're tired of juggling coaching part-time and want to fully focus on doing what you love, this business accelerator will give you the tools and support to make it happen. Hit the link in the show notes below to learn more and start living your dream. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast. And I have a really good feeling this is going to be a great episode because this is the 4th time we've had to reschedule between the holidays, the LA wildfires, urgent business matters coming up for both of us. So I'm really excited to have Coach Liam Jefferson here today. He is the head coach of the Oakland Wolves basketball club in the UK. He also serves as a coaching clinician for Transforming Basketball and impacting coaches across the world, and is now also Great Britain's head coach for the U16 men's team. So welcome to the show, Liam.
Thanks for having me, man. And I know, like you said there, we've tried to do this a few times. I'm pleased that things your side are now all good, and I'm looking forward to diving into it, getting started.
Absolutely. So, getting started with you, before we talk about your coaching journey, I just love to get context on like how the game of basketball just made an impact on your life.
Yeah, I mean, I got introduced to it from a very early age. So my dad was actually the one that introduced me to the game. He was a policeman when he was a similar age to me now, and they had a police basketball team. So he would get together with some of the other guys, and that's what introduced him to the game. So then when I was old enough, he put a ball in my hands and attached a hoop to the side of a brick house in rural suburban England. And that's kind of where the journey started. And I've been really lucky that it's taken me to university and got me an education. It's taken me across the world with different opportunities with the clubs that I've worked for and with the national team. And it's introduced me to a bunch of really cool people that are now a big part of my life. So I'm very grateful for him buying me that rubber basketball when I was 6, 7 years old and introducing me to the game that I'm still involved with 30 years later.
100%. And isn't it interesting and fascinating that, our backyard courts where we fall in love for the game, where we're just having fun, we don't even recognize how powerful that is and the opportunities it can lead to and how global the game is. So, like, when did you really realize the magnitude and the power of that rubber basketball?
I think it was a good few years into my coaching career. I would say my playing career was nothing of note. I played at an okay level here in the UK, never really managed to make it. Always had grand dreams, as everybody does, like you said, when they first start playing in their backyard and you're pretending to be MJ or Kobe in a game winner situation. But I was never fortunate enough to be able to make it from a playing standpoint, but always knew from a very young age that I wanted to coach and work within the sport. And I think it was really when I spent time working at Loughborough University, where I spent a long chunk of my early coaching career, that you just started to see how much of an impact as a coach you were having on the lives of other people, that it struck home to me actually how much of an impact it had on my life as well. So we're setting all these guys up that we had the privilege of working with and coaching for what we used to say life after Loughborough, which was where we were based. And actually what we were doing at the same time was setting us up for that as well. And I think it was when you started to see some of those players come back to the program with a wife and a kid, or coming back with their dream job and they're no longer playing, and actually talking to you about the lessons that they took from the game and from us as a coaching staff and how that had impacted their life, that it really hit me that, like, yeah, like you said, like that's had a huge impact on me and what I do, as well as everybody that I've had the privilege of being able to have some form of interaction with across my career. Yeah, it's probably, I say that was maybe like 7, 8 years ago, like in the real middle of my stint at Loughborough. I was there for 12 years. And that's helped then to shape kind of the direction that I take with my coaching philosophy and how I want to lead a program and lead a team and work with the athletes that I get to work with now on a daily basis as well.
And that's where I really want to dive into. And so before we kind of get into that, you're talking about the ultimate mission, right? As a basketball coach, clinician, leader, however you want to kind of label yourself, it's to impact kids and prepare them for life beyond the game of basketball. That's why we named it BTG basketball. And so with that, can you kind of describe, before you get into your current philosophy, how your philosophy as a coach has evolved from when you first began?
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest area. I think when I first began coaching, I was a player that realized, like I said, I wasn't going to make it as a player, and I always knew that coaching was where I wanted to go. You kind of enjoy initially the control that you get as a coach. You enjoy being able to impact every aspect of the game. You enjoy the fact that you can still be around the team and have that interaction, and you're chasing wins. And I think early on in my coaching career, I was very naive to the impact that I had on the players' lives and the direction that we take. And I've had a number of conversations with coaches and a couple of other podcasts as well, where I've kind of mentioned that the moment the penny dropped is when you realize that you have to cede a lot of that control that actually I wanted early on in my coaching career. Because if I don't cede that control, those players aren't being set up for whatever comes next, whether that be in life or whether that be within the sport. And so I think my philosophy has shifted massively across the kind of 17, 18 years or so that I've been coaching for now.
1,000%. And so I'd love for you to kind of dive into what are some of the things you've just kind of let go of in terms of control. And I can kind of give some context on, because I'm still a young coach. Like I'm like 6 years in, and I'm still learning every single day. And I'm still like, I still have that hyper competitive player in me. Like I can feel it. Like even just yesterday, I was talking to a dad and he came up to me after, he's like, you wanted it, you brought the energy, but the team didn't, and that it just kills me. It's like, I'm like almost like playing defense on the sideline. And I'm like, but I also want to recognize that I feel like when I'm at my best as a coach and most effective as a coach, it's like what you're talking about. Like I have no control if the layup's going to be made or not. I really don't. Right. I could sit here and say push ups and like try and be a drill sergeant. But it's like, like the wins and losses are really so far out of your control in a certain point, right? As a coach. And I'm still, as a young coach who's so competitive, still learning that. So I'd love to hear, just a little bit of advice from myself as a young coach. And I know there's other coaches listening that are thinking the same thing.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is where you fuel that energy and competitive spirit and what you divert it into. And I think
Right.
it's very easy to get caught up in, at least for me early on, in effort and energy and that want. And actually the shift for me was applying that same level and intensity that I had to want to compete to how I wanted to teach. So
Wow.
I take a very self-reflective approach after games, after the experiences that I've had within in the game. And the games where I've coached my best, I've wanted to be the best teacher I could possibly be in the moments that have happened in that game. The games where my energy and because I'm very similar, there's games where I'm fired up on the sideline, but if I'm not directing that in the right way, the players aren't getting the best version of me. And so I've had some conversation with coaches this year, again, just being very reflective as to why is that? And actually, me taking away some of that control has allowed the players to explore more. So when we talk about a big shift for me has been, and I'm sure we're going to dive into it a little bit more, has been adopting more of a conceptual style of play, trending more towards utilizing the CLA in my practice environment, and actually allowing the players to have those experiences. Now I'm being more of a teacher in those moments and guiding them and trying to scaffold an environment around them to get to those points rather than expecting them and pouring all my energy into that expectation as such. I don't know if that, I guess you kind of know
Yes,
where I'm
that
coming
no, that makes 1,000% sense, and I agree. The best games that I've taught are the games where like I don't even think about winning. Like I don't. I just think about teaching, teaching and leading, teaching and leading. And then those are actually a lot of times the games we play the best. Even if we lose sometimes, like those are the games we play the best. Now, we play the worst when I'm like, I want to win, I want to win, I want to win, you know? And so like it's something that I'm yeah, go.
and those moments where you allow things that are outside of your control to dictate the emotion that you have in game. So outside of my control are how the players are performing in that moment, how the referees and the officials and the umpires are calling the game on that day. I can't control that. I can control how I teach and the best version of me as a teacher. And it's been no surprise the games where we've been best this year are where I've been the best teacher I can possibly be.
That's amazing. That's a piece of advice I just needed right now. So I really appreciate you dropping that right now. And I'm sure I'm not the only person. I'm sure some of the listeners are like beaten over the head, like, oh, it's just a reminder sometimes. Like we know we need to teach and lead. It's just sometimes we are competitive. Like that's why we get in. We love the game, and we also have to recognize now we're teachers, we're stewards of the game. They may not understand, the high level of conceptual offense that we understand. So kind of breaking that and going into the conceptual offense and the CLA. Like I've touched on it quite a bit in this podcast, like Alex has been on, but I also want to recognize that it's really, really different, right? Like this conceptual style, constraint led approach, ecological dynamics is very strange for a lot of people. So, can you talk about your relationship with it, like, and how you've kind of come about? Because it makes sense to me. Like, it's kind of always made sense. I always was like skeptical of like what we did in drills, but it just doesn't make sense for everyone.
Yeah, and my kind of relationship with it has evolved over the last 2 years, but I'd say it's a slightly longer journey than that. So towards the back end of my career at Loughborough University, I worked with a great head coach by the name of Mark Jaram, and the best way for me to describe Mark was he's just a lifelong learner who's always inquisitive about something, always wanting to try and unturn a stone where there may have been a competitive advantage. And we had started to gravitate towards more of a conceptual offense and more of a conceptual style of play. And that's what kind of piqued my interest. And then a little over, probably a year and a half ago now, I was very fortunate to be recruited and offered a job to work with Alex Sarama at the London Lions Academy, which at the time was trying to be one of the leading academies in Europe, and we wanted to try something or achieve that by trying something completely different and utilizing a conceptual offense from U12, U20, maximizing the CLA, all of our coaches singing off the same hymn sheet, coaching in the same way, utilizing the same terminology, having a shared philosophy. And that's where my first touch point with it came. Now, I've said to a lot of people before that I was probably very much a games-based coach. So I was using constraints in my environment, but I didn't quite understand the science behind
Yes.
constraints and ecological dynamics. And
Same.
I probably still am getting to grips with it now, even though I work for Transforming and travel the world, fortunately, to be able to deliver clinics to other coaches. I'm still getting to grips with it because it is very sciency is the best way to
Yes,
describe it.
it is.
But the
It is.
more that you get to grips with it, the more you understand. I think the more efficient and the more creative you can become as a coach, and that's definitely the kind of relationship that I've had over the last 2 years or so with the CLA and with conceptual. I think that the easiest way for me to describe it is I changed my perception of what skill is. So
Yes.
skill isn't something that can be learned and stored and retrieved on demand to be played out. That's not the way the game works. If I was to stand up from my chair now, I wouldn't think about every movement that I take to be able to stand up. So actually, we talk about skill as how a performer interacts with the environment around them. That changed my approach then to how can I use constraints in my practice environment to present different opportunities, or in the kind of verbiage, an affordance, an opportunity for action. And the more that I understood that, the more I was able to shape a much more creative, a much more engaging, and a much more intentional practice environment. And that's kind of been my journey over the last 18 months. I'm far from being an expert right now, but the thing that I love about the CLA is I can continue to evolve as a coach the more I get to grips with it without becoming that repetitive, you said drill sergeant, where I have my book of 20 drills and this is tried and tested and this is what's always worked for me. And I'm always doing that because the players very quickly become great at those drills, but it doesn't necessarily always translate to the game.
1,000%. And I'm on a similar journey. I think I just started a little bit earlier, and I just started binging the Transforming Basketball podcast because it's like what in the world is an affordance? Like ecological dynamics. Like why do I what? Like I just want to coach basketball. And like sciencey. Like I started at university to try and get human physiology and try and do that, but like I would learn real quick. I didn't want to do chemistry, biology, and all of that. So then at first when I'm looking through some of this, I'm like, oh my God, because I'm similar. I started as the games approach, I just set up small sided games and I'm like, oh, they're just, doing games, but I didn't realize like there's so much that goes into it. Like I still have to get so much better at it. And like, it's like exciting and like scary at the same time. So I'm just curious, like, how have you continued to build on your knowledge, of course, and then how do you teach that, and can you give an example of like a practice or like an evolution of like a season, and you used a certain constraint of 0-second decisions and you built on it over here, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. I think the biggest thing for me with going into a practice environment and what we want that environment to look like is what's our intention and where is our attention. And that's something that Alex said to all of us as coaches at London Lions very early, is that all of our practices need to be intentional and we need to be aware of what we're guiding the players' attention to. And that's helped me to massively understand how I'm trying to create a practice and an environment and what I want that to look like. I think that the biggest challenge for me as a coach is how I make my environment as non-linear as possible, so
Mm.
that we're not building from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, because again, the game doesn't reflect that when they get into playing live and there's an opposition and there's five guys wearing a different jersey color to you. Like it just doesn't look like that. So how can we be very intentional, but in a non-linear fashion, that we're still getting in the reps that we need without repetition? So that repetition without repetition. And so that for me is what a typical practice will look like. We will do some form of activation that typically has nothing to do with basketball. We've been known to play flag football. We've been known to play volleyball. We've played a bit of tennis. We'll do different small-sided relay games just to get the players going and moving. Then we'll get into our activation. Again, very repetition without repetition, so that they're exploring different degrees of freedom within their warm-up, and we're not just limiting them to, as they do their activation, it's the same lunge after lunge, because again, when they come to moving, when they come to navigating their environment, it doesn't look like that. And then the practice, to someone that doesn't know the CLA, probably feels like it bounces around all over the place. So we might start with a 3v2, move into a 1v1, then get to a 4v4, then to a 5, and it might look like we are throwing, like you said, a bunch of different small-sided games. And I think at first that's probably what it did look like, until I started to understand how I can manipulate the constraints in that environment to get the players to act on something. And that's where I think from a player's perspective, that's massively engaging because
Yes.
it's very rare that in a practice we will do the same thing twice. It's
Yep.
very rare that in the space of a 2-week period we'll do the same thing twice. We might be working on the same concept or the same aspect within how we want to play, but the way that we do that, what you would typically call the drill, but for us, a small-sided game that we will use to be able to do that is always going to change and evolve. And I think as coaches, the real art in that comes into your environment when a lot of coaches are taught about the plan, do, review cycle. So what's my plan? I'm going to go do it, and then after the practice, I'm going to review it. What went well? What didn't go well? I think on the micro level, the CLA is doing that constantly throughout a practice,
Yep.
and being able to plan that in a 1 hour 30, so a 90-minute practice, we may have 6 small-sided games that we're going to look at with 4 or 5 constraints planned in each. But if I recognize that the players aren't learning and moving towards the affordances that I planned, I might change those constraints on the fly. And so that plan, do, review cycle is constantly going on in my mind, as well as watching what the players are doing in front of me. And I think that's where that intention and attention comes back to the fore. So as well as the players, where's my attention as a coach, and what did I want the intention of this small-sided game to be to get to the end goal, which ultimately is we want them to be more skillful in that environment. We want them to be able to act upon the affordances that present themselves.
100%. And I feel like that's been my biggest growth these last 3 to 4 months is the constraints, like, and then giving individual constraints, like whether it's a training session or a team practice, like, hey, my point guard, he has 5 dribbles, but everyone else, y'all got 2. So it's catch a rip or move on. And so those are some of the things like I'm still working at and trying to get better at. So can you kind of give a context of like, what are some of the different constraints that you give your team? And then what are the certain constraints you give to certain individual athletes?
Yeah, I mean the easiest way to think about it is there's 3 areas that we could constrain. So we can constrain the environment, the task, or the performer. So when you understand that and how that shapes the environment that you're trying to create, that helps to get to the end goal again, which is those affordances that we want to present themselves. So we could add in time constraints. We could constrain the space that's available to athletes. For something like the pick and roll, for example, when I'm installing pick and roll and the different coverage solutions that we want the players to become attuned to, we may start out 2v1, but we'll constrain the space that's available to them. Then we might build it out over time to a 2v2 and a 3v3, still constraining the space. So a great one that I love to go with on the environment piece is what we call wall pick and roll. So let's say we're running a side pick and roll on the 45. The opposite lane line is out of bounds now. And we'll just have a coach stand there with their arms out or maybe stick a couple of cones down. And anything that goes past that space is out of bounds. Because in the game, that's your roll tag and that's your gap defender. And so actually we want you to become efficient in punishing whatever coverage it is that we see with our coverage solution and becoming highly attuned to the different affordances there that might present themselves. So we could do that. You mentioned a couple of great ones around on the performer side. Maybe I could add individual constraints to players in practice. So actually you only get 5 dribbles, or you have to hit ahead within 3 seconds of you receiving the ball if we want to push faster in transition. You could strip it even further back, and I know you have some listeners of the podcast that teach the even younger age groups, that actually when you're first teaching someone to do a layup, we still wouldn't teach it 1v0. We'd teach it 1v1, but we would constrain the defender that you can only stand in the smile and you can't move. You can only have your hands above your head.
Right. Yes.
But already there's an external cue so that play that's never done a layup before isn't being taught right, left, extend 90 degree between your elbow and your knee. Because again, in game, it doesn't look like that. And so these fundamentals do not exist. How can I make that performer skillfully able to navigate their environment? Well, I can add a defender and heavily constrain what that defender can do. And I think in a practice, we would see, and we're obviously talking about at the very entry level what that would look like, but in a practice, the real art in it is understanding what do my individual players need on a day-to-day basis to get to the point that we want to get them to.
1,000%. One of my favorite things when I'm working with the youngins who struggle with layups, I'll probably have them go closer to the basket, but sometimes if they're a little quicker, I'll have them behind the 3-point line. Just ball on back, and then the chase down layup is perfect because they don't have to go over someone, right? But it's like they have to actually go game speed, and so they're kind of figuring it out. And then I have one kid who I'm thinking about specifically, right? Sometimes kids are afraid of contact, and they'll just like fade away, take a terrible. And anytime he does it, I don't even care if it's make it turnover. Turnover. Not doing that as a habit. Nope. So just doing some of that. I think it's more fun. Like I've just had so much fun with the constraint led approach. Like it's so limitless. And so when like we both love it, we're both lifelong learners. And so for someone who's like built out a club and like you have other coaches, like how do you teach this? Like how do you like do you show them Alex's stuff? Like I know you're kind of invested into the transforming world because that's what I'm in now. Like I love this. I'm all into this. I understand it. The kids love when I'm coaching it. But what I found is some coaches know the game's approach. Some coaches are like, "What in the world is this?" Those are usually not the coaches I hire, but just kind of giving context and trying to learn from you.
Yeah. So I'm just for some context, I'm very fortunate that in my position as head coach of the men's team and the academy team, I'm then responsible for kind of that coach development and support for our coaches for all of our age group teams. So that will be U12 all the way up to U18 and what each of those coaches is delivering in their environment. So there's a magnitude of different ways that we go about doing it. The first thing that we did at the very start of the year was, and I'm not being paid to say this, was get all of our coaches access to transforming basketball because my philosophy and what I wanted our club to look like aligns very heavily to everything that we do with transforming as well. Then we get together once every month as a group of coaches for an hour 30 on a Thursday evening between practices because a lot of our coaches have, as I'm sure is the same over there for you guys, full-time job roles. And so they aren't fortunate enough like me to be a full-time employed basketball coach. So I also need to respect that they are where they are, and I can't expect them to be at the level that I'm at, but I can support them and guide them on that journey to get to that point. We also have a shared philosophy. So every team in our club plays the same way, uses the same language as the same as what we wanted to achieve at London Lions last year. And so at Oaklands now, you could walk into any of our practice sessions and you would hear the coaches saying the same thing, using similar small sided games. And we've limited some of the small sided games that our coaches can use. And we've given them a bit of a playbook and we've built some of that out with them. And then we give them license to be able to explore within that their own creativeness. But there is a minimum expectation of what we would like to see them deliver. And then every week, each of our age group teams gets an hour's skill session with me, where I'm head coaching maybe 30, 35 kids in a gym. So across a couple of different age groups at the same time. And those coaches are able to assist me in those sessions to also help with their development. They can drop into any of our men's practices, any of our academy practices, and watch what we're doing in our environment. And I think the feedback from a lot of those coaches who typically are either parents or alumni of the program and the club that want to stick around and give back has been the same. It's opened up their eyes to what is a much more fun and engaging approach, first and foremost,
Yes.
for teams at U12 and U14 and U16. And it's given them that element of challenge as well. And they're having to learn and grow and develop alongside the kids that they're coaching. I think that's the beauty of the approach is it opens up everybody to, like you said, limitless possibilities and opportunities within it. The big thing for us is moving into next season, how we continue to guide those coaches. And that's something that we're starting to talk about now before we get into our off season over the summer, so that it's not just a case of, like I said, us giving them small sided games that we want them to deliver. And actually, how do we, in the same way we do with the players, how do we help those coaches become more autonomous and able to read the specific affordances that might present themselves? We started doing a lot more video in that sense and allowing those coaches to view video of our practices and our games and feedback. And be able to engage in conversation with me. And then my equivalent on the women's side is a coach, highly respected coach called Lee Ryan. And the two of us within the program will deliver that with all of our coaches.
100%. No, I like it. I'm trying to steal and start a similar model, and I want to just make a quick comment on autonomy because that's one of the biggest drivers to like internal motivation. And I think that's one of the reasons like we've seen a lot of success in BTG with certain athletes like improving a lot faster because we're allow them to be a part of the process. Like they have autonomy, like, and I could see how that helps like coaches, right? They have autonomy. And I also like that you're giving them a philosophy, kind of a set of small sided games, because it can be overwhelming at first because there's so many opportunities, right? Sometimes it's like good to kind of almost constrain them, let them keep teaching them, and then let them continue to kind of like explore in their own journey. My question for you will be kind of like, what is some of that shared same language, if you don't mind me asking, because I think that's something I want to try and do as well.
Yeah, so like it basically encompasses everything that we would see in the product on the floor. And this is something that I definitely took away from Alex. His brain is just a computer, and in the way that he
I
stores
know.
and thinks
I know.
about the game. It was genuinely a privilege to be around. And I think it again comes back to that intention piece. So if we can give terminology and give something that allows athletes to attach to an aspect or a concept, then it's easier for them to understand. So things like dominoes, we will talk about. Things like floor is lava and not catching in the mid range, we would talk about. But then we also have each of our concepts have a name. So we might have a side pick and roll or a rub pick and roll if it's in the middle of the floor, an angle pick and roll if it's a step up. We'll talk about gets. Away is an away screen. Double is a stagger screen. But what we'll also do is with each of those age groups, they will have certain concepts and certain things that we want them to deliver to that age group and nothing more than that. Then the grand plan and the magic in this will hopefully be in 4 or 5 years' time when a player that's with us now at U12 moves up to U14. That U14 team is teaching them 5, 6, 7, 8 new things on top of what they learned at U12. So we're not throwing everybody in and saying, here's our club philosophy, go teach everybody the pick and roll. Because at under 12, kids shouldn't be playing in the pick and roll. We should be teaching them how to create dominoes in a dynamic 1v1, and we should be teaching them how to potentially play out of gets. And that's offense. Then we're talking about dominoes. What does advantage look like? What does spacing look like? And that's it at U12. And we've got to become elite at that. Then when they get to us at U14, we might start talking about away screens. We still probably don't sprinkle in pick and roll. When we get to U16, now we're talking about pick and roll, but maybe only against 2 or 3 coverages. Then hopefully when they get to me at the U18 level, they have this foundational base for me to be able to build on. The challenge we've got is we're in year 1 in this process and trying to roll out this club model. So everybody at the moment is teaching something similar, and those in the higher age groups are trying to throw a little bit more at it. But the hope
Right.
is in 5 years' time, as a player has come through our program, they legitimately have joined us at 10, 11 years old and then joined me with the academy team and the men's team at 17, 18. And there is just this, I don't want to say corporate way of doing things, but they have that knowledge and shared understanding that's gone throughout our entire pathway and program. And I think that's where then that language and terminology that I'm talking about is key, because too many times you can have, especially for a program like ours, where you can move up through the age groups over a period of time, you're almost at a whim to each head coach and what they're teaching as to the knowledge that you get. And that's where having this aligned approach to it and working with our coaches on a week to week basis, like we just spoke about, helps align all of us to put the athlete in the best possible situation.
100%. And I wouldn't even use the word corporate. I think it's a curriculum. Like you have a systemized curriculum that kind of builds on each other, just like our teachers do in the United States or in England or wherever, really. And I think one of the things that I really like about the model that you're talking about, and I'm getting really excited about, I'm like, oh, I gotta go to it. You know, I gotta get to it. Is the continuity, right? Like this is how kids like really learn the game of basketball. And this is the biggest problem I have with American basketball. And I'll kind of give you an opportunity now to kind of talk about how Europe is just the model is different and it's better. In my opinion, it's just way better. Is kids just go play on different teams. And even like you're talking about like these same programs, like when I was at one program, like my coaching philosophy was one way, then the 12U was one way. 14U has a different philosophy. There's no synergy. So like when you're moving up, like as a, like let's say I taught that my kids dominoes at 10U from a one-on-one standpoint, and the 12U coach doesn't even use the word dominoes. Well, that like they're not building on their basketball IQ. So can you kind of just like give context to all of our American listeners how much, I'm going to say it's better, how much better the European model for youth development is?
Yeah, I think it's definitely further along in mainland Europe than it is with us in the UK,
Okay.
and I think it's
Gotcha.
something that I think there are really great pockets of work across the UK where clubs are starting to align more so to how it has been with our European neighbours over the years, and that's exactly what we're trying to do now with the model that we're trying to roll out. And there's some great examples of clubs in and around us, and then other pockets within the country that are doing the same. But essentially, you would have that shared philosophy and direction, and coaches all singing off the same hymn sheet. You will have understanding that certain concepts and certain areas of the game aren't taught until a certain age. You only have to look to Spain as a great example at mini basketball. They start at U8, lower hoops, smaller ball, smaller sided game, much more about just playing the game. Nobody's really keeping score. Nobody's really focusing on details and what they're achieving, but it builds that lifelong connection with the game. And then as they move through, they start to teach some of their concepts. Like I said, for us, we've stolen from other European neighbors that we don't want to teach the pick and roll until U16, potentially U15,
Okay.
because
Okay.
what it does is remove players' ability to be able to make decisions, to be able to play dynamically one on one, and you can become very good at it very quickly at a young age because defense doesn't look and feel like it does as bodies mature and players get bigger and taller and stronger. And so I think it's something that we're definitely learning more about here in the UK as well and trying to roll out as well. But we wouldn't be doing it within our club and our structure if we didn't believe in it as well. And I've got a lot of friends over in the US that are coaches that say exactly the same thing that you do. There isn't that shared curriculum, there isn't that shared kind of direction. A kid could play for 5 different coaches within the space of a season across AAU and high school and club, and they're going to get 5 different philosophies and 5 different approaches. And I think the other area that's massively different over here versus the US is the weighting of practice time to game time. And that's where in the US, and again, my knowledge is okay, it's not great, but everybody I speak to speaks of masses of AAU tournaments where you're playing 2-3 games in a day
Yes.
and maybe having one practice. Now, for us, if you look at a 16, 17-year-old within my club, we have 4 team practices, 3 team lifts, and 2 individual skill sessions in the space of a week. And they play 2 games at best in that week. One on a Wednesday afternoon, which is our academy game. So that's your high school equivalent. And that's when all of our academy games across the country are played on a Wednesday afternoon. So every
Oh, nice.
basketball academy in England plays on a Wednesday afternoon, and that's the only day that you play your academy games on. And then at a weekend, you have your club games. So that's when those players would either play, for me, with the senior men's team, and they are able to play both. And that's a huge advantage for us because you play against your own age group on a Wednesday and then against guys that are 27, 28,
Good.
29 in their
Love
prime.
it.
Some of them with full-time jobs, some of them where it's their release and physicality is different, but you play against them on a weekend. Or you could also play for your age group team on a weekend. And that's where a club model like ours is great because they're able to move within all of those different teams. But they play 2 games at best in the space of a week. Some weeks it's just the one game. But in that week, we are on the floor at least 6 times where we're utilizing the constraints-led approach. We are very, like I said before, intentional with what it is that we're teaching, so that it's not just play, 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 and the players don't actually understand how they navigate that environment.
1,000%. And there's a lot of gold wisdom you put in there. And so I didn't want to get into AAU basketball, like our club basketball, because of exactly what you talked about. I thought it was just like playing games, playing games, playing games. And then just as a person, I recognize, the demand is there. And I love coaching teams. So it kind of just made natural sense to kind of make the leap and then try and bring over the European model here to the US, where it's a similar thing. The biggest challenge for me is finding gym space. I'm not sure what it's like for you there. I'm sure everywhere it's always a struggle to find quality gym space at a price where you don't have to, we could go on that all day. Anyways, I just I think, it's the correct, to me, it makes sense. It's not like we don't put our kids in math class and have 5 different math teachers within a semester. It's really kind of almost dumbfounding to me, but it's also because in America, our coaches don't have to be FIBA certified. Like I know in Europe, y'all actually have certifications. Here, it's ridiculous. Some of the coaching I see, it's absolutely the trauma that some of these coaches put on these kids is, I'm just going to say it's disgusting. And so there's a lot of things that are wrong about the American, and I know it's not just club basketball. I see it in club volleyball, club baseball, it's all the same. And I think it's America is just so individualized, and I want to go play here, and I want to have my own decision. And versus Europe, y'all are much more communal than us, and that's kind of just a philosophy difference. I kind of want to kind of leave our last part of the conversation on just how much more fun and engaging this style of basketball is, or style of you can adopt this to any sport, because that to me is what we're going to help our kids be lifelong basketball players. They'll join men's leagues like you mentioned, and that's such a healthy outlet to connect with people and be physically active.
Yeah, and we see it across all of our age group teams. It's that joy on their face when it comes to a game, and you see that they execute a concept or a coverage solution to the best of their ability, and just how satisfying that is for them, because they know that they've learned that in the past week or two. It's something that they've been able to achieve, but it's also been something that's been autonomous for them. So they've read that affordance, they've understood in that situation what was the right decision. And I think that in game has been really rewarding for us. But I also, like I touched on before in our conversation, I think utilizing the CLA in your practice environment just means it's more engaging and more fun. And there's so much more joy in a gym as well. And I know Alex spoke on the pod before. It's still a way to be able to hold players accountable to what you want them to achieve in that environment without them making a mistake and being told stairs or 50 push-ups because they've made a mistake. And that's the biggest shift, is you can hold them accountable as to what is right and wrong within the concepts and things that you're teaching with the CLA without having to punish in a way, like you said. And there's an understanding that as coaches, we all create some form of trauma in some way. So
Right.
even if we're utilizing the CLA, if we tell a player that they've not done something correctly, or there's a better way for them to be able to do it, it's still going to create some form of trauma within them. So how can we limit that but still guide them to the best of our ability, rather than adding extra on top of that? And that's where I think the CLA comes into its own.
Yeah, I think the extra trauma I was talking about mainly was just the verbal abuse that I see. And that's my main issue. I think a little bit. Obviously, they still need accountability. You can't travel. You only get 2 dribbles to score. You got to use your left in this drill or whatever, or this activity, however it is. And so I feel like I could kind of go on it and talk about this all day. So I'll give you one last question before I give you an opportunity to share where people can connect with you. Is talking about, I think that's kind of the biggest thing. I feel like the biggest pushback we get in America, what I see in comments on Alex's Transforming, or on Cole's For By Any Means, it's you don't yell at your kids, you don't discipline your kids, and da 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 da. Can you kind of address that comment as we close out?
Yeah, of course. I think it all comes back to being much more of a transformational leader and building. It's not about fear, it's about a level of respect and
Yes.
a strong relationship between yourself and your players. To be able to hold them accountable, they need to know that you care. They need to know that you have their best interests at heart. And for me, that comes in how I treat them on a day to day basis. I'm a very firm believer in that, and I think there are more ways. There's more ways to skin a cat. So some people believe that the more you scream, the louder you scream, the more you shout, you will ultimately get to an end goal, which is true, but it is done from fear, or sometimes true. It's done from fear, or fear of consequence, or fear of not achieving what coach wants me to achieve. Instead, hopefully trying to hold someone accountable, but doing it in a way that's built upon a relationship of respect and trust and care. The player themselves wants to do it for themselves. And they understand
Yes.
that you as the coach are guiding them and directing them, but not serving the purpose of the coach. And I think that's the biggest thing for me. Don't get me wrong. If my guys are if I'm calling them in for a huddle pre-practice or mid-practice and it takes them 10 seconds, I might say down and give me 3 push-ups.
Right.
That moment, those 3 push-ups, it's a quick one, changes behavior. I don't need to send them to the stairs or to the bleachers for 20 minutes because they've turned the ball over 3 times. They know they've turned the ball over 3 times. They know they've made those mistakes. My job is to help guide them to how can I improve that? How can I be better in that? And I do that, at least in my opinion, by having that solid foundational relationship with them. And that's where I would always argue that case. And I'm very much on the side of where you are and Alex is and Cole is and I think that's the future of the sport and for coaching. And we're seeing more and more coaches go in that way because, again, we are wired for life after whatever program it is you are, or life after basketball for them. Because, especially in the US, at 17, 18, that might be the end of your journey with the sport as a player. And so, how we set them up for going into the world of work, if I miss a deadline, I'm probably not going to get yelled at. If I'm 5 minutes late for work, I'm probably not going to get yelled at in the way that I am in a basketball gym. Now, yes, there's consequences attached to that, but we need to teach that in a way that's real life specific.
100%. And that's the perfect way we can end this episode with a ton of wisdom. I'm gonna have to go through and rewatch it myself just so I can really kind of digest it all and be a sponge. So where can people that are listening, follow you, kind of consume more of your content, and really any other plugs you have for this? Because I feel like we need to continue spreading this knowledge and making it as accessible as possible.
Yeah, I'm always open to connecting. I mean, we connected in the same way through Instagram, so I'm always open to people reaching out, and I'm open to learning from others as well. Because as I said at the very start of the conversation, I'm on my own journey within this space and with coaching this way, and I'd love to be able to connect with other people that are there as well. So the best way is naturally in this day and age through social media. So it's Coach Jefferson on Instagram and at Coach L Jefferson on X or Twitter. And I would love to be able to just carry on the conversation with as many people as possible.
Appreciate your time, and just for everyone, he'll get back to you. So appreciate your time again, Liam. I look forward to staying in touch, and if you ever want to bring some guys out to LA, just let me know.
No, pleasure, absolute pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Beyond the Scoreboard podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with a friend, coach, or parent you feel like would get value from this episode. It's our responsibility to impact as many parents and coaches who are the ones that are impacting our athletes. That's how we create a ripple effect. So thank you for being a part of our community, and we look forward to serving you all next week.